Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dual Axis podcast. My name is Andy Kriebel. I am your host, and today I am fortunate to be joined by Ellie Fields. We're going to talk about everything she knows about growing a revolutionary product, and I'll give you a bit more background about that in a second. We're also going to talk about what it's like to work on something so groundbreaking. Some products are so revolutionary that they disrupt the market and spawn imitators. So what are some ways to make sure your product continues to stand out in the crowd? Welcome to the Dual Axis podcast, where we meet influential people and data that will inspire you to become great at whatever you do. This episode is sponsored by the Maple Square. The Maple Square makes it their mission to create a space where women in data and tech are seen and can be found. Get in touch with them at themaplesquare.com. Bit of background now about today's guest. So the first moment I started using Tableau, so that was way 2007, I knew instantly that I was using something. But what didn't take me real long was to realize that the differentiator with Tableau was their passion for the people behind the product entity. And that's where Ellie comes in. I first met her in 2008 when she joined Tableau. And at that time, she was the first product marketer at Tableau. She never made me feel like a customer, though. I'm forever grateful for the support that she's given me along the way and helped me create my own voice in the community. As the VP of product marketing at Tableau, eventually grew her team to more than 30 people before moving on to become a senior vice president of product development. In March of 2021, Ellie joined Salesloft as their chief product and engineering officer. Sounds fancy. Wherever you are, wherever you're listening to this, I appreciate you making the time to the Dual Axis podcast. Welcome, Ellie.
Well, thanks for having me, Andy. This is great. Very excited to be here.
Great. I guess to start, what is product marketing?
That's a great question. And a lot of people in product marketing ask that because it's defined a bit differently at every company. But the way I think about it is I think about when a product goes to market, what you start is basically a giant conversation with the market about what your product does and how people use it and what kind of value happen with that. And I call it a conversation. It's a term from a book called the Clue Train Manifesto that actually came out a long time ago in internet years, about 25 years. But it's not a great product marketing is not a push. I'm going to tell you what you should think about this thing. It's a conversation with the market that involves the people putting out the product and the people using the product, the people watching the product, the competitors. And it means kind of positioning, messaging, thinking through pricing in many cases, thinking through the depth of how you explain the product, sometimes very technical documents, launching new capabilities, things like that.
Okay. And what's the difference between traditional marketing and product marketing? I get the two confused and always think they're the same, but they're actually quite different, right?
Typically, product marketing is part of traditional marketing.
Okay.
And so you have a marketing team that thinks about where do we put what messages and what channels. So are we buying LinkedIn ads, or are we, what's our voice on Twitter like? And are we buying digital ads and print things, and thinking about that whole marketing mix? Product marketing, I used to call the message machine, because product marketing is where you think about what are we trying to say to the market in this moment and to which part of the audience of the market. And then you work with the various channels to make sure the right message is showing up in the right way in each place.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's an interesting link back to the brand, because the brand I always think of as kind of the soul of a company, and the product marketing then helps you kind of translate that. So you're showing up consistently with a consistent message and a consistent tone and just a way that you come to market, a little bit like a person should show up slightly differently at a funeral versus a party, but still the same person.
Yeah. So what do you then consider some of the core principles of product marketing?
When I think about product marketing, I think it all comes down to your positioning in the market. What are you trying to say to the market? What change, especially with a disruptive product, are you trying to get out there? And it goes beyond just saying, hey, my product is great for ABC. With great product marketing, what you're trying to do is influence the larger conversation about why someone uses a product. So for example, at Tableau, when we came to market and when I was there, Traditionally, what companies would do is buy very, very large business intelligence systems, and you'd have a room full of people who are churning out reports, and that was just the way it was done. I mean, it was an established market, a pretty big market, tens of billions of dollars, and everyone had one, and it wasn't really working for most companies. And we had a whole different approach. And so at that stage, especially with a very disruptive product, we were less trying to tell people about, Tableau has this capability or that capability, and more trying to change their expectations for what they could get and achieve with data. You shouldn't have to wait 6 months to get a report. You shouldn't have to give it to somebody in a room in another building. You ought to be able to just ask and answer a question of data. And if you can change that perception, then there's room for your product to come into. So that's a lot of how kind of product marketing thinks is what are we trying to change? What conversation are we trying to influence? What are we trying to say in it?
So, and when I started using Tableau, the business model was we just need to get in the door, right? So start with that one person in the company, like I was at Coca-Cola, first person to use Tableau there. Is that what then Tableau would use as part of their product marketing? Say, okay, we're small to sell these massive deals into these companies. Nobody knows who we are. It's trying to reach that individual and then expand to everybody else versus the other way around.
We definitely tried to reach people first. We tried to reach people who felt a passion for data and believed in the transformative nature of data in their organization. And those people then carried our message internally, very
Right.
close to product marketing. Different organizations do it different ways, but is customer marketing. And one rule, you asked about principles, but one principle or rule maybe of any marketing is if your customer's going to start talking for you, shut up and let them talk. And so if you have people at Coca-Cola, as you were, or other companies, and they've got results and impact from what they're doing with a product, and they're evangelizing it internally, you work with them to equip them and help them, and they
Okay.
carry the message for the most part.
Right. Right. I
And
didn't
then, yeah, you
realize.
can do things like case studies where you
Yeah.
take that with permission, of course, and make it public and write a story about it, et cetera.
Yeah. I didn't realize I was being product marketed, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll say all these things, it's funny. We put people in departments and boxes and so on, but a lot of times, and this was definitely true at Tableau, the core of it is you just believe the world can be different and better, and you work towards that. And I think one of the things that was really different at Tableau was we had a transformative product, and the people there did believe in the mission, as you kind of alluded to in the beginning, not
Yeah.
just for organizations to be better, but for the world to be better, to have a richer conversation about
Yeah. Yeah.
everything involving data. And so uh, one of the other principles, again, I think about is you have to believe in what you say,
Yeah.
and you have to believe in what you're telling customers. You have to believe you're actually making a positive change in their life and in their organization, or it doesn't come across authentically, and you also don't feel
Mm.
great about what you're doing. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
Tell me a bit about Salesloft and what you do there and how you take in your experiences. You've got vast experience in product marketing now. How have you taken that over into Salesloft to help transform their business?
Yeah, great question. I think product marketing is really just the study of how you show up in market and how you participate in a market. So have definitely taken a lot of those experiences with me as I've moved into uh, more of the product management side and product and engineering at Salesloft. A lot of it is just understanding how that conversation is happening. What do people
Mhm.
think of your product now? Where are the points of leverage where something could be radically different than before? And
Mhm.
how do you communicate that to people? And what's interesting is in technology, a lot of times that conversation is so closely intertwined with what you're actually building, because hopefully you're building the things that will take the market forward, and then you're trying to communicate those things to the market. So it's a very, very tight loop. Um, a lot of product management, especially as you go up to the executive level, is thinking about how to land in market.
Yeah. We're going to come to community in a minute. One of the things I think Tableau was great at was taking those people that the initial people in the company, kind of the land and expand, and then building the community around those people. But we're going to come back to that because I think that's a critical aspect to product marketing as well. But I want to go back to just product marketing in general. I don't know if it's successful.
Great question. Product marketing acts through a lot of the marketing channels, and so you can see how those move. For example, if you launch a product, you're typically going to see in your website visits and in other marketing a pop, right? And depending on how effective your message is, you're going to see a larger or a less large pop. And then you're actually going to keep some traffic after that, right? The idea is that you maybe pop around an event, but you land at a higher baseline than before. So you can measure through things like that. You can certainly message test, especially in digital channels. You can message test how different messages are landing. Ultimately, you can of course look at the growth of the revenue and the product. And interestingly, product marketing even comes out in things like churn and customer satisfaction. Because if you have a message that isn't resonant with how the product actually works, people might buy it, but then ultimately abandon it.
Yeah.
And so really
Feel misled, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, or you're just not fulfilling the promises you put out there. And so
Yeah.
you can see product marketing in everything from win rate to marketing, marketing leads and channel performance to churn.
What was
And
your
it's hard.
analytical?
I know that sounds amorphous, but then what you do is you kind of compare what messages are in what places, and when you came out with kind of a different way of positioning something, and see how that moves the needle.
What are the typical ways? I don't even know if this is possible, that you can directly link, a marketing campaign to a sale. That's almost impossible, isn't it? You just try to sort of see, how did we reach this person? Did it come from an ad we ran or an email we sent them or something? Is like that always
You
seems like,
absolutely can.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can. And actually, it's a fun data challenge. And in the industry, they call it attribution. And you've got everything
Right.
from how the channels, which channel hit this person first. Was it a LinkedIn ad, or did they get a white paper or something, which is rarely the very first contact. But you can absolutely message test as well, and attribute through sales, right? We at Salesloft, one of the things we do is let companies run kind of prescribed sales plays around a topic. Maybe it's if your product is broad, maybe you have 2 or 3 topics that are really interesting to people, and you can see how cadences on those different topics hit. Sales plays on those topic hits. You can change messaging, right, and give some core messaging to sellers, so as they're speaking to people, they can see which of those resonate in decks, right, and in pitch decks and things. And so you can actually trace messaging through all the way through the beginning of the demand funnel out at marketing, through the seam of product and marketing, marketing and sales, excuse me, and all the way out to the final sale and beyond.
Okay, gotcha. Let's look back again. We're going to tee on a bit of your a career tour for you. You were the first product marketer at Tableau, like I said in the intro. How did you even know where to start?
Well, that's a great question. There was a lot to do at the time, and we were about to launch a new version. I think version 5 was my first version, maybe 4.1, and so trying to think about how do we frame up this launch was really important. And in the kind of product that we were marketing, you really had to explain what was different about all the new capabilities in the core positioning. And so we spent quite a bit of time on that. I think we're also trying to think about core message and how that tests with different industries, right? It was not a verticalized product, but it was one that applied to many industries. And so thinking about, well, how do we talk about this in manufacturing? How do we talk about this here and there? There were some things that we just wanted to get more thoughts out on. For example, the blog and social media, we kind of had a very minimal presence. And so we wanted to make sure that was there. So those were all things I was looking at. And then I think one of the biggest questions as you start in product marketing is there something very immediate to do, but also looking at the breadth versus depth of content. You bring people in sometimes with breadth. We talked about the message machine and hitting a lot of channels, but as people are really considering a product, they often want the depth, right? Whether it's a white paper or a webinar or whatever it is, they want something that helps them go to the next level. And so evaluating, do you have that? And we didn't have a lot of that at Tableau when I started. And so really trying to build out that depth. even in things like top 10 table calculations, and which you may remember, things like that, as we brought out new table calculations. One other thing I always try to do when I look at product marketing is say, how do you stand out in the market? Right? The thing about a message is it's very, very easy to copy. And so I think it's important to know why people are listening to you. You can do that with great images. We did that actually a lot of times with the product. We tried to use the product wherever we could as a proof point, if you will, along with customer voices and things like that. So all over our website, you would see the product in action. And that was something that really convinced people that this wasn't just another BI tool telling you can do everything with data, because every BI tool said you can do everything with data. So thinking about how you actually stand out is super important in product marketing.
Yeah. What kind of support did you have at the beginning, or did you have kind of complete freedom to figure it out?
I had complete freedom. At that time, I was working very closely with Christian and Chris, two of the founders, on messaging and how the product showed up and how we wanted to position it and launch it. And that was amazing. Those two were so deep in what we were building and why we were building it, that they were just a treasure trove of information. At least I think the head of marketing provided great support, and but on the whole, I was able to do a lot of you could call it freedom, or you could call it how startups work. And maybe just one quick story. When I started, we were in a adjunct to the office in a strip mall, because Tableau had just kind of, not a strip mall, kind of a small office. And Tableau had kind of grown out of the main office, so we had started putting people in this side office. And at one point, I was in a cube in this office with literally two other people on the two other surfaces of the cube, and so we had to coordinate when we would back up our chairs and get out of
Funny.
Of our space. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it was freedom, and it was also just the job that needed to be done.
Yeah. When did you realize that you were working with like a truly transformational product? Was there like a moment where was there like a moment when, the light bulb went off, like, oh my God?
Yeah, I think it was in talking to customers. It was talking to customers. And I would get on the phone with customers, these early customers, and they would just talk about how they could go home earlier because they weren't messing around, trying to fix an Excel report or something. They would talk about what they found. And it was through their insights. One woman I remember told me, she said, I was in a room with all the partners at my firm. I think it was some kind of an environmental consulting or a scientific firm. And she said, I showed them what I found, and there was dead silence. And she thought, oh no, I look like an idiot. Like
or something, right?
They knew this, or and after a few seconds, one of the partners said, oh my God, we've never realized that before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's moments like that, and hearing that percolate through people's lives and their organizations and what they're able to achieve, where I remember thinking, wow, I knew the product was great, but this is really different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost the identical experience that I had, which is it's really interesting. You share that same story. What were some of the biggest challenges you had that, other than maybe moving your chair within the cubicles? What were some of the early challenges you had?
The biggest challenge we had early on at Tableau was really just breaking out of the noise. It's hard for a startup, and the tech press, God love them, they love to cover a funding and an exit. And so, we were at the time running in a very fiscally responsible way, which is always a great thing for a company to do. We do the same thing at Salesloft. And so we weren't taking round after round of gigantic numbers of funding. And so we weren't getting covered for that. And I remember trying to even get our product covered, a new launch covered in the Seattle tech blog or something like that. And they wouldn't give us the time of day. To the point where when we finally went public, a lot of people talked about us as an overnight success story. And, at that point, I had been at the company for 5 years. It had been going for a few years before I joined. I was like, this was not an overnight success story. This was grinding it out and really pushing. So that was one. I think the other big challenge that any small company has, and going back to being fiscally responsible, is where to invest, right? We saw an exploding market. We saw demand everywhere, geographically, across verticals, across use cases. We just saw a tremendous possibility, and yet we weren't trying to blow through cash fast. And so, how do you invest? What do you prioritize to take advantage of that?
Let me go on to back to kind of impacting people's lives. So you mentioned the one customer you spoke to before, and I'm 100% convinced that if I hadn't started using Tableau, my life would not be as fulfilling as it is. I wouldn't have a job that I love, wouldn't have found kind of my passion for things. And I'm sure I'm only one of thousands and thousands of people that Tableau has impacted that way. What was that like for you to hear those kinds of stories?
It was really meaningful, and, I mean, Andy, as you know, I'm a diehard data geek myself. I love me some data, and I personally, love working with data, and I think hearing those stories really gave me, a lot of meaning and purpose, partly because it helped transform people's careers, right? And we always
Yeah.
had a rule in marketing, like, make the customer the hero. The customer is the hero. Make sure they get all the credit, all the props. We saw so many customers go through promotion after promotion after promotion,
Yeah.
because of what they could do, and that was really fulfilling. I think as we started to get a little later on, and we went into Tableau Public, which was our free product, it was extremely gratifying to see what people could do with public data, because I do think we live in a world that has all kinds of stories. Data stories are part of that. In fact, you could say every single story has data as part of it. And so there's a narrative element and qualitative element, but there's a quantitative element to everything we do, from agricultural policy to the local sports league to science and the environment and what's happening there. So we had people visualizing on all of those topics, and that was incredibly gratifying to me, and I know many on the team, because we're at a point in the world where we need to be able to look at things deeply, and not just take one story, one person's story, but look at the personal side and the aggregate side. So vastly meaningful.
Yeah. So I guess Tableau Public is a differentiator for people's careers, because it's like, the analogy I like to use is, if you're looking to hire an interior designer, you look at their portfolio. You don't look at where they went to school, right? So if you're looking
Exactly.
for somebody that's good with data analysis and data visualization, they go to their Tableau Public profile, and people get hired that way.
Absolutely.
Was the intent
Yeah, and
when
just
you
just on
started
that,
Tableau Public?
it was the intent. It was the intent was to, from a business perspective, just get the word out farther. Because
Right.
again, it's that breakthrough thing, right? How do you break through no matter how good your product is? And we thought, gosh, if people could just see this and use it, they would understand. So
Right.
that was definitely the intent as we started to get the community built out and authors. The author profile page in particular, we talked about as a resume for
Yeah. Yeah.
for authors of visualization, so they could showcase their work. They could get it all together in one place,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so we really designed with that in mind.
Okay. That worked a lot for me. So, all of my
Yeah.
jobs I've had since
Well,
I
and
started using Tableau is because of that. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I remember I hired actually somebody from the information school at one point,
oh
because
yeah,
we
yeah,
needed someone
yeah.
to build out
That
some dashboards.
Rachel
And
Costa. Yeah.
yeah, she was great. But the way that we vetted people was, I went and looked at their Tableau Public profile, and
Yeah.
narrowed it down, and then we talked to people, and it made it much easier to get somebody great.
Yeah. That's good to hear. I'm glad they were helpful to you. Uh, excellent. So what was kind of life like inside the company? And how did you, as far as like when you had a case study like mine, or any other customer where you're impacting the lives, you've told me a bit about how that impacted you, but how did that impact kind of maybe the culture of the company, or how did those things resonate around the company? Like, what was the impact similar to what you were experiencing?
Yeah, I think we really were a small, unrecognized, mission-driven company out of Seattle, and so I think everybody from the sellers to the finance staff to, definitely the developers were just really, really excited when we heard about stories like yours and others. And in a really, the word authentic is overused these days, but in a really authentic way. It wasn't, yay, we got a $10,000 sale. I mean, sure, of course, we're always excited to make a sale and make sure the company could continue to run.
Pay
But
the
it was,
bills, yeah.
yeah, exactly, got to pay the bills. But it was really authentic, and our customer success became our own, and we were very, very customer focused because we just thought that was the right way to deliver value and partner with our customers.
Yeah.
I do want to tell one story about the day that we went public, which, as I said, we were the overnight success
Right.
after a decade of work. And what was amazing, a number of us at Tableau went out to the stock exchange for that day. I think about 60 of us actually. And it was a very emotional day, not because the company made money and people made some money after a lot of hard work, but because it was this moment where the community really was behind us. And I remember being texting with customers, from around the world who were congratulating us, and employees, and it just felt like this moment where we were all just we were all being seen, like the community, Tableau. And one thing that was really unique about that experience, and I think is the mark of a great community, is when I think about Tableau, I actually think about the product, the employees, and the customers. It's just different waves out. I mean, that whole experience, just like the relationship you and I have, as you mentioned, it's just as meaningful to me as the employee relationships I had, the colleague relationships. And I think that there was a sense of we're doing this together that was really shared across all of those people.
Yeah. That's a good segue into talking about community, and Tableau in particular has just, I mean, it's what drives Tableau. I had a chat with a woman named Carmen Taubman a few weeks ago, and she helps companies consult on, kind of the balance between community and marketing. And one of the things that she mentioned that's really resonated with me, that I know it this way, is that marketing is about reaching new customers, community is about keeping them. So the question that I asked her was, if you had $5,000, would you spend it on marketing or would you spend it on community?
It depends. It depends on where you are.
Classic
If you're
consultant answer.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, if you don't, there has to be a germ of the community there for you to nurture it, right? And it is nurturing. You can't own a community almost definitionally, right? So if what your challenge is to get customers, you better go market and get some customers. But at the point where you have a core of people who are really engaged and you're starting to see that passion and that excitement, I think leaning into that is important. I think you always need to do some marketing. You always need to be bringing people in.
Yeah.
So I think that you probably never want to spend less than half of that budget on marketing, I guess, just to give you a really hard non-consultant answer. And the other thing about community is there's definitely ways you can spend money, but on true, new customer marketing, it tends to be dollar intensive. And so if you want to make any headway there, you need to put dollars there.
I guess from a Tableau perspective, the community drove itself. So you never really had to invest in the community other than providing a platform where people could have those conversations, like on the forums, or Tableau Public. Of course, there's an investment in those things, but you never really had to, I guess you nurtured the community in a way, but from my experience, it seemed like, maybe from the outside, that Tableau is just letting the community organically go the way it needs to go.
There was definitely an aspect of that, and it was a great community for that. We did actually invest a lot of thought, I would say, in how to move the community. We did things like early biz contests where we would get 7 or 8 contestants and judge them. Maybe a very early precursor to Iron Biz or something. One of the things we did, I mentioned earlier, was always make the customer the hero. We would highlight customers in blogs. There was an early user group movement, which we supported sometimes with dollars, small dollars. Yeah, exactly.
We started the first
sometimes
one.
we'd sponsor a space, or pizza or something. I personally went to a lot of those user group meetings, and so did others at Tableau, sometimes speaking, sometimes just attending. So we had a focus on it. And I think we're deliberately trying to bring people together, trying to shine spotlights, trying to give props to the authors. But yeah, there was a lot of it that grew on its own. I think also when we created the Zen Masters and Ambassadors, that was a deliberate focus on trying to highlight and in some ways give back to the community, because we found these people who were maybe answering a ton of questions on the forums, or blogging a lot and sharing their knowledge as you did, and we wanted to recognize them in a way that they could use professionally and give them kind of a title that was meaningful, so they could go and with all the work that they were doing, go and say, wow, I've earned this honor. And that was, I think, a big part of it as well.
Yeah. I remember when I first found out that I was becoming a Zen master, I think it was like 2012, I think and I had no idea what it even meant.
Right.
And I was like, oh, right. I was just always doing this stuff for a long time. I didn't realize anything in it.
Right.
Other than anything, so now people know about it, and they intentionally try to move their career in that direction, I guess, which, is okay. Yeah. But it's to me sometimes doesn't feel as authentic as it used to. But I guess that's the nature of it when people understand a bit more about what it's like. So again, going back to the community, how do you define community?
I think community is the conversation that is happening between the customers and the company specifically, that is usually led by a few champions, or there's folks in there who are kind of leading that discussion. But it's the ongoing back and forth of, why are we doing this? What's the meaning? What do we need? And it's just that kind of ongoing conversation. I realize that's a kind of a nebulous way to describe it, but I think it's you can break it down into component parts. Like you mentioned, the forums, user groups, contests. We have Iron Viz at Tableau, social campaigns, things like that. Whenever we launched, we would do something fun like the Joy of 6 campaign, and often get.
I used to have a T-shirt. I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah, that was a great one. But just have fun with it. That's a lot of what we would do. But I think it's those engaged people who are constantly in the conversation and are a part of it.
Yeah. What advice would you give to other companies that are looking to start a community?
I think the main thing is to spend a few moments and listen and find what really generates the excitement in your user base, right? In your customers. What's the vein that they are so passionate about? And that's going to inform your development and your marketing in general, but it definitely informs your community. And I think you also hit on something where you said, hey, there was this genuineness to what you were trying to do, to just teach people, to share knowledge, to take the overall level of data visualization up.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too. I sometimes see companies try to build communities on extrinsic rewards only. Like, you're going to get this title, or maybe there's
like the Microsoft MVP kind of program, or whatever. You do enough things and you get this little pat on the back kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And that one has some intrinsic elements as well, I think. But I think you have to find the true core, like what is intrinsic, what really moves people, because you really can't buy a community in any way possible. You cannot buy a community. I think I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is to experiment a lot with how to start the conversation, because a lot of what you're doing when you are doing this nurturing is you're elevating people who are champions in the community. You're starting conversations. You're seeing what hits, and some will and some won't, right? I mean, you can't you can't force it ever, but you can observe, see where the passion is, see where the heat and light are, and go with it.
You learned a lot about starting and growing a community at Tableau. How have you taken that experience into Salesloft?
Yeah, Salesloft is a great, very different community. It's a community of sellers and people who are passionate about serving buyers well. One of the things I've learned at Salesloft is how deep the passion for really working with customers goes with a lot of sellers, and so connecting with that community in a lot of ways on LinkedIn, for example, or at the events we do. We just did an event in Austin, our Sales Love event. But it's the same kind of thing. It's find the passion. Sales Love is kind of the tagline, for lack of a better word, that we think of here. And it really represents the idea of honing your craft, loving your buyers if you're a seller, us loving our customers, and really having a strong discussion around how to do this well, right? Not a selling gets a bad rap sometimes, but really how to find the core of what's great in selling and lean into that. So that's the conversation that we have at Salesloft with the community. And then it's engaging in all the different places and getting to know customers and finding out who's out there and so on.
Yeah. One more question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. What gets you out of bed every day?
Great question. I love building products and building teams. And those two things go together. I don't think you can do one without the other. Well, you definitely can't build products without building teams. I think teams need a purpose. But the thing that I really think about a lot as a data geek is how to make data really as useful as possible. And one of the things I believe is that data has to be in a workflow. And I think pushing the boundary of how to make people more productive, but inject data into the right spots so that they can be and do their best. I'll use, again, Salesloft as the example. Sellers are people. Companies hire people for a reason. They're not robots. They're not computers. Robots and computers do different things. Sellers are great at connecting, building relationships, guiding through a process, but they're often faced with a bunch of overhead, like checking a bunch of inboxes and emails and so on. So I'm really fascinated by the question of how do you get all of that overhead work off of them and also give them data in that workflow in the moment where they can use it? Because you don't want a seller going and looking at 50 dashboards in a day. They probably don't want to do it. And it's not how, you
Right.
want sellers spending their time. But they are smart. They know what they're doing. And if they have the right data in the right moment, they don't have to go search for it. They're going to be able to make better decisions. And when I look at the state of, call it software technology or productivity or any of those words you want to use, I think that moving that boundary on how do we help people do work in a great way through workflow and data married together is a super interesting question. And that's what gets me out of bed.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ellie. For those of you that are listening, if you enjoyed this, if you're on YouTube, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'd love your feedback, so please leave a comment. If you're listening to via one of the podcasting platforms, please don't forget to subscribe and give the show a rating. It'll help us reach more people and bring more conversations to other people and help them grow their careers as well. So be sure to tune in next week. Speaking of community, my guest is Will Sutton. So Will was the Iron Viz champ at Tableau Conference 2022. I still have no idea how he built what he did, and I've listened to him present about how he did it. It's just, otherworldly, the kind of things I never knew Tableau could do some of those things. But we're going to talk about his life before and after Iron Viz, because it is indeed a life changer for people. We're going to talk about what you can learn from entering competitions, what it's like to be on stage in front of thousands of people. I know my hands would probably be shaking. I'd be mistyping, all that kind of stuff. I'd be terrified up there in front of that many people, but super composed. So I'm interested to know, kind of how did he approach that? Did he get coaching? Whatever that might be. We're going to talk to him about the storytelling that he had and lots more. If you'd like to get in touch with Ellie, her contact information is in the show notes. And thanks again, Ellie, for joining me. I appreciate it. And it's great seeing you again.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you as well, Andy.
All right. Bye.